Hi and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Enigma. We are still going great guns. You can find us on all of the major podcast platforms and please check out over 350, yes, I said 350 videos now on our YouTube channel. So, I'm lucky enough to have traveled the world. I'm lucky enough to have experienced different cultures. I'm lucky enough to have had some experiences that have shaped my leadership, both the good side and the mistakes that I make on a common basis. But this is all about the anthropology of change. So how do we actually drive change when we are in constant change? Let's be honest, and I'll say this to my guest, today might just be as simple as it gets. So what do we actually need for change? What does anthropology bring to the conversation? So with all of my episodes, I need someone far wiser than me. And I have luckily found someone far wiser than me. So come back to me just after this break, where I will have Khairunnisa Mohamedali from Smarty Train, who will help us with all things anthropology and leadership. I'll see you in a moment. Hi, I'm Adam Pacifico, and welcome to the Leadership Enigma, a world-ranked, award-winning podcast that's insatiably curious as regards what leaders do, how they do it, and importantly, why. We'll delve into the human doing, but even deeper into the human being and the power of human-centered leadership to drive sustainable change. So whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts and disruptors, as together we will discover that success leaves clues. Khairunnisa, thanks so much for coming in. How are you?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here.
So glad you could make it into the studio. I always are. This is your first kind of studio podcast, isn't it?
It is indeed.
What do you reckon?
Brilliant.
It's a little bit overwhelming sometimes, isn't
is.
it? When you try and think of not 7 cameras and 15 microphones and however many stage lights.
It's just you and me making eye contact.
It is just you and me having a conversation. Look, I did my best for a very quick introduction in relation to anthropology, but I want us to kind of really start to unpack this for leaders and leaders who are within small, medium and large businesses. So we'll get to that. But just help us with a little bit about your background. How did your journey take shape to the role that you're in right now as the Chief Innovation Officer for Smarty Train?
That's a great question. Let me take you on a little journey.
I love it.
I remember some key moments, and I think the first was I'm 14, sitting in class, and folks come in, they talk about their careers, a little bit of exposure into what the world could be like. And this lady comes in, PhD, molecular biologist. I had never in my life before encountered a woman with a PhD, let alone in hard sciences, and it completely opened horizons of possibility for me. And I thought, I want a PhD. I did not know that was achievable.
At 14?
At 14. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to achieve. Fast forward a few years, I'm doing an IB program, pure and applied sciences, well on my way, in my head, to my PhD journey. And I saw her as a molecular biologist. I thought, I'm going to be a molecular biologist. That was the example I had. For those who don't know, in an IB program, you have to take theory of knowledge classes where you basically unpack in a very critical way. How do we know what we know? And how do we agree that knowledge is knowledge? What's worth knowing, what's not worth knowing? And really unpacking the structures of what makes information. And there I learned, and this was another mind-blowing moment for me, is that everything we know, science, hard fact, it's actually an agreement amongst all of us that this is what we think knowledge is and fact is. What science fundamentally is that we don't actually prove things. We just don't disprove them. So everything we know is kind of what we know until it's not true anymore.
Okay.
And if you think about it, there's a lot that we build on that knowledge. It's going to sound very abstract and esoteric, but I'm saying it for a reason, because I realized that it was much more interesting, rather than let's study molecules or genes or stars, is actually how do we actually know what we know? Why does it matter? Why do we agree on these things? So I shifted course to philosophy. University, fast forward a few years.
Right.
And I
have so many questions already.
I'm studying philosophy now.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's my track. And I was at the University of Toronto, North American universities, you take electives. So something completely out of your field of study to get your credits. I took a political science class. And the next mind-blowing moment for me was that political science and social sciences generally apply scientific principles. That is, how do we make or understand the way movement happens. Why do molecules work the way they do? Why do they move the way they do?
Right.
We try to apply that to humans in complicated systems. So we don't approach human behavior as, unpredictable. We try to put rules and laws and structure to it.
Right.
And to me, that is fascinating, because if you throw a ball up in the air, it's going to fall back down.
Yes.
Every time you do it. If you and I have a podcast like this on the exact same day of the week, in 2 weeks' time, in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks, who knows what's going to happen or where the conversation would go. Behaviors are a lot less predictable, and I think a lot less easy to fit into, I'll call it rigid structures, but to try to predict, right? And the whole basis of science is that if you know the cause of something, you can then try to control the effect, right? If we know what causes something to create energy, we can sort of take that and control the effect, and we use that to power cities.
Okay.
But with people, how can you pin down cause in this way to then control effect? And it was a very beautifully messy world where you're trying to put a lot of order to it. And I loved that. I thought it was a very noble thing to try to do.
Even messier now, perhaps.
Oh, yeah. And so how do you put structure and order to all this messiness of human behavior? And so that then set me on the track to get a PhD in social sciences. And then I discovered anthropology in the course of that, which is a way of studying or understanding people in their contexts and not holding yourself to, actually, I need to explain why people do this. I need to understand why they do it so I can then predict or control what behaviors might be in future.
Right.
In anthropology, you go in there, you sit in a space, you take part in it, you observe it, you understand it, you try to figure it out, and that's what you do, and that's the end of it.
I have so many questions. I really do. I want to go back to something that you said earlier, because I'm intrigued by this. You were 14 and this lady came in who was the PhD. What was it about her that was such an impact on you, that she became such a role model, and that someone that you're now still talking about? What was it that was so compelling?
My memory of it is she was actually quite young, and she was quite... Sometimes you see professors, you see people who have PhDs, and they are impenetrable.
Yes.
Glasses don't make sense. Don't put those down. Don't forget to make their tea with milk in the morning. There's this sort of, I guess, stereotype you might have.
Yes.
And oftentimes, in my experience, it tended to be not young women. So seeing her, and her job was basically solving or trying to unpack very complicated facts, questions, scenarios, situations using a very structured method. And I thought this pursuit of just knowledge for the sake of it, which is kind of what you are aiming to do when you get a PhD, you go into the academic world, is you're trying to add to the whole body of human knowledge. I thought that was amazing. And I thought the idea that I could do that was incredible, and I thought, let me try.
So it's fascinating that she was a role model then. Have you ever had any contact with her since?
I don't even remember her name.
Really? So let's hope she's listening or watching
fingers crossed.
and it triggers that memory in her. I'm also intrigued as to, where did this curiosity or desire come from you at such a young age to want to pursue this line of inquiry?
I've reflected on this a fair amount because it was such a pivotal moment. And I was born in Pakistan. We immigrated to Canada when I was 5.
Right.
And to Quebec. Now, in Canada, education is run at the provincial level. So curriculums, rules, all that stuff. And in Quebec, if you enter the country, you have to go to French school. So until the age of 5, I was living in a very different environment. Yeah. Everyone looked like me, spoke like me.
Yeah.
I was learning in English. And then I go to Montreal. First year, you're in a welcoming school where you're thrown in with a bunch of other kids who've come from all over the world to kind of acclimate to the language change.
Okay.
And then you go into full French school. There's no English-speaking teachers there.
Wow.
Full immersion, you're in it. Picked up French, fantastic. But it was a very alienating experience, as you can imagine, because...
How old were you?
I was 5.
That's
and then 6.
That's a big experience for 5 or 6, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think you're at that age making sense of the world, but you feel like you've made a good amount of sense of it already.
Right.
And you're kind of opening up to growing.
Okay.
And when that big shift happens, at least for me, it was... everything changed. And I think this is very common with kids and immigrants who come into countries that are very different from what their experiences might be, is you get very good at understanding that you need to be able to read a situation, a cultural context, cues, so that you can fit in. Because all we really want to do is fit in, right?
Do you feel a little bit chameleon-like?
Yes.
Especially as a young kid as well?
I think so.
Where you're still trying to figure out some of the basics. And I've had this conversation before with leaders who say they've got to be chameleon-esque, still authentic, but they've got to be chameleon in order to fit in appropriately, especially with the different cultures that they might operate in.
100%.
We're talking about the same thing, aren't we?
Definitely.
Okay.
And I think it's this big advantage, actually. What you realize when you enter a culture, an environment, a space that's very foreign to yours, and you kind of have no choice in it. When, in my context, when I was young, you realize that you get very good at reading these environments, but you actually realize that the environment doesn't change. It's that you need to understand it to understand how it works and how you can make sense of it.
Right.
And I think that sense making.
And how best to take advantage of it.
Exactly. So you're either fitting in, or in a work context as a leader, you're adding value, moving people in the right direction. And for me, that woman with a PhD was taking a very structured approach to making sense of a lot of complicated stuff, which I think in some ways gave me a story and understanding what I had experienced and been almost innately doing.
Yes.
For coming on 9 years now.
This is a really good segue, because you're talking about being born in Pakistan, coming over to Canada, moving from English to French almost at the flick of a switch. And that takes us to this subject of the outsider advantage that I want to talk to you about. Just talk to me about the power of being an outsider. What is the benefit, or what are the challenges, and how can we start to pull that into leadership? What are your thoughts on that, the outsider advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. A very common analogy, which I think many will have heard, is the fish in a fishbowl, right? Most of us as fish, we don't see the water that we're swimming in. It's what it is, and we take it for granted.
Okay.
The outsider in perspective is that you're actually noticing the water. And to translate that into not an analogy, what you're actually noticing are the assumptions that people are making, the behaviors that people are repeating on autopilot, the things they take for granted as unchangeable, because it's always been this way, so it is this way. Or this is just how it is, I don't see it to question it.
But you're seeing it through a very different lens.
And when you come in as an outsider, that's exactly it. You see it as through a very different lens, and you can actually notice it, observe it, identify what the root causes of it are, and therefore what can be done, what's the value in it, what can I do differently?
When we think about leadership, I'm going to jump around a little bit, because I'm really interested in this area. If we think about leadership, sometimes they always say, listen, you've really got to be a pilot to run an airliner business, or you've got to be a doctor to run a healthcare business. There might be something to that, but what's also the power of someone who doesn't come from that arena at all, but is coming into lead or run a business of humans that just happen to be within the airline or the pharmaceutical industry? Is there something in that where,
absolutely,
again, it's the power of the outsider?
Definitely. And I think when we obviously I want a pilot fly my plane, and I want a doctor operating
for that,
on me. Yes. Technical expertise, 100%, having that knowledge, the skill set, growing it, etc., very important. What the outsider advantage does is it gives you a lens on what people are doing almost automatically by rote, and not necessarily considering what could we do differently here? What actually can we play with? What can we adjust, adapt? Does this even make sense?
Right.
When at the Smarty Train, when anyone starts who's new, I'm like, you're the outsider. So part of what you need to do now is tell us, what are we doing that we're not seeing? Right.
So let's talk about that, because any business could do this.
Absolutely.
You get a new starter, whether it's the newest intern, or you've just got a brand new CEO. Help us. How can we help make their journey as easy as possible, but also leverage their seeing everything differently?
I talked earlier about how we kind of always want to fit in, right? Yeah. And the risk is that when someone joins an organization, they're focusing on, how do I fit in? But if you create space for them to focus on actually observing how you are working, how your systems run, your ways of working, any assumptions you're making, and give them the space to actually develop a perspective and share it with you, you're switching it a little bit. And you're saying, this is not about you fitting into what we do. This is about you helping us identify what we're not seeing anymore because we're drinking the Kool-Aid or we're swimming in the water.
Too busy doing.
And that's the key thing. And to take it a little bit further, you don't have to necessarily be new to an organization to bring this lens.
Okay.
So one of the things in anthropology, a way of research, is participant observation. So if you are trained as an anthropologist, you basically have to go study people in context, and that means being in that context. So months at a time, a year at a time, immersing yourself in something completely new to you. What you learn through that is how to observe what's taking part, but also take part in it. And so if you think about the hard sciences, let's call it that, if you're running a research experiment, you have a lab coat, you are working very hard not to influence what you're studying.
Yes.
In anthropology,
in some ways not to contaminate that process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in anthropology and participant observation, you're actually saying, I recognize that as a researcher, I'm in this, I'm going to experience it, because it's not just about what I observe and record, it's also about what I feel and experience.
Which is so important for the human being side of things.
Critically important. And I'm going to be critical about this and aware of it. I'm going to recognize that I shaped the environment, but I'm going to learn the skill to be able to observe, understand what's happening, but also be a part of it. And that is what's critical. If you're a leader in an organization, you've been there a while, it's not that you have to be new to get the outsider perspective. It's that you have to almost train yourself to be very observant of what's happening and learn how to question what you might otherwise take for granted if you're not paying attention.
So I've had leaders sat in the very chair that you're sat in of very large organizations leading hundreds of thousands, where you're really almost now in a fast-flowing river. You know, these are billion-dollar companies in 170 plus countries. How can they start to get a little bit of that in the system, that almost time to pause, reflect, or even if it's not just about the new, about those who have been in for a while, to just take stock? What can they start to do to maybe get some of this in their DNA?
It's a great question. And I think what you started with is exactly it. We're so busy with doing. You're in the slipstream almost. And it's about how do you build in you the ability to not only be doing, but just take the time to be. Being in a situation. Being in a context. You're in a meeting and you're observing how are people responding to you, to your presence. But then what are the dynamics? So that's one thing. A way of working. When we're doing, we're focused on the task execution. Being means actually taking a step back and saying, why are we adopting this way of working? So I think curiosity, cultivating a curiosity and being very hyper aware of what assumptions you're making is a superpower. So if you're, and it gets harder if you're in a large organization, if you're the leader, as you can imagine, of a global, because there's a lot in different areas. And short of you traveling and stepping your feet everywhere, which is no bad thing, it can be difficult. When we've worked with organizations of this size, advised CEOs, board, one of the things that we can observe quite quickly, and I think this happens a lot, is that the team around the leadership, so the leadership team and the people who report into them, support them, work with them, they are almost, I don't want to say canaries in the coal mine, but they're like first response systems.
Almost like the triage system.
Exactly it. They are seeing things. They have very often, if you speak to them, acute observations about what's happening that a leader might have a bit of a blind spot on because they're so busy doing. So I'd say if you have a large team, large organization, global spread, identify who are those people that are actually quite aware, quite observant, and understand from them, give them the space to communicate with you what they are seeing, doing, and build your information in that way.
I sometimes hear the term sense-making. How are leaders sense-making? Is that what we're talking about?
Kind of is.
Sense-making internally and also externally, from noise to signal.
100%.
I had Tiger, who was the former CEO of Genpact, who's been in the studio a number of times. He was the CEO for 13 years, and I said to him, how much of your time did you spend externally facing and how much internally facing? And he said it was deliberately 50-50. He would force himself to be externally facing to try and understand what was going on and bring some meaning back in. And he would ask his leadership team to do the same thing. So what can leaders do in order to try and dial up the sense making? Because what I'm hearing and seeing at the moment is leaders, when I say to them, are you busy? They say, oh, I'm so busy. We're so busy. And then I say to them, but are you too busy to lead? And then there's silence. How can leaders just stop and pause, or is it as simple as that and just see what is going on around them, potentially from a very different perspective?
I think the answer to that is it's actually less complicated and time consuming than a very busy leader might think.
Right.
And I think what that ultimately means is it's about, I'll say discipline, but that's very hard to do, but even a moment, because when you're doing anthropological research, you're not, the research, the understanding that you're doing is not different from the doing. Because that's the whole point of participant observation. Participant and
it's
observation.
Simultaneous. Gotcha. Okay.
So if you're a leader, it's not that I'm going 100 miles an hour, I have no time for this. It's actually at the start of a meeting, taking a breath and saying, I'm going to reflect at the end of this for like 30 seconds even.
Yes.
I'm going to observe in moments what's happening. Because I think what leaders often do is they're thinking about how they come across, what they need to be saying to direct people, what their brand looks like. Are they feeling authoritative enough? How are they performing in the moment? That takes a lot of brain power. No bad thing, but sometimes it's important to give some of that brain power to observe what others are doing. How is the room? Because if you have only an internal view of what you need to be doing, you're not focusing on the external environment that you're deeply shaping as a leader.
Right.
So being able to, in those moments, I'll say a meeting, it could be preparation for something, it could be in a moment of execution, it's actually taking a step and almost that mental training to say, let me observe what's happening here.
To just stop almost in the moment and or be deliberate about it.
Exactly.
As well. Can I link this to, there's a lot of talk about the DEI framework at the moment and the changes that we have seen, and companies are shifting in relation to their perspective. And I've always had a focus on the diversity of experience as the powerful piece of the DE&I element. What are your thoughts in relation to DEI and the outsider advantage? What kind of work or what kind of trends are you seeing at the moment?
So I think when it comes, and I 100% agree, I think it's a diversity of experiences, but also the diversity of perspective that fundamentally gives, because that's the payoff of the diversity of experience. So I think that diversity of perspective is critical, and the outsider in is almost one frame on that, because what you could have as an outsider in is someone who has no experience in a specific area, come in and give you that. So they're shaking up, challenging. So that's a difference in perspective. There's something also about the richness of understanding how people work together, who come from different backgrounds, have different perspectives, if you want to call it that. And that's very important to think about in the context of D&I. If you bring people, and as you well know, different perspectives in the same room, but you as a leader are not giving them the space to surface that difference of perspective, there's really no point to it, right? Because again, we always have an inclination to want to fit in, to be accepted. And sometimes we'll throttle the perspectives, experiences we have to share if we feel like actually it's going to make us not be a part of this group. And so as a leader, it's how do you create that space that you're actually leveraging, giving people the space that diversity means something, versus everyone in this room comes from a different background. We're a great team.
There's that. I heard the term hippo for the first time. It was months ago, which is about the highest paid person's opinion, right at the start of a meeting where everyone says, all right, well, then it's already been done, as opposed to the leader maybe being the very last person for he or she to speak, and that richness of a perspective coming out. And again, I've had CEOs sat here who said they've had a formulated plan in their mind, or they've had a decision in their mind. They've listened to perspective and they've pivoted and they've said, no, you're seeing and hearing things that I have not been privy to, and as a result, I need to go in a different direction. You're right. My mind is changed. So again, is that the humility and the curiosity of a leader that now are dialed up capabilities in a world that, let's be honest, got a little bad?
Oh, absolutely. And to add to what you were saying as well, one of the things, if you're a leader thinking, how do I do this? From an anthropological perspective, what you do is when you're understanding people and how they live, how they work, whatever it is, you are always treating the people that you're with as experts of their own experiences. And I find that's a very handy phrase.
Experts of their own experiences.
So if you treat it in that way and you think actually this person, what they're sharing me is their perspective, that's their expertise, they're an expert in their experience, you're immediately, I think, primed to give it the weight it needs. And this is not about, again, drawing from anthropology, when you're doing research, you're not going in hard sciences, you have a hypothesis that you're trying to prove or disprove. And that's what you go in. In anthropology, you don't go with that. You go into a space, people are the experts of their experience, and you use the information you're receiving to build a sense of what's happening and to continuously iterate, improve, and add to it, evolve it. And that, I think, to go to the point about curiosity and humility, I'd almost say it's humility. The other frame of it is that seeing people as experts in their experiences and continuously building it. So you're always interrogating. And the most important thing I'd say, Adam, is that you are not looking for absolutes as a leader, an absolute answer, certainty in a response, certainty in direction. because
it's not available anymore,
is it? It's not available. And you're deluding yourself if you're thinking, actually, I can find this, and that's how we're going to move forward.
I'm loving this conversation. Let me ask you another question, and I might be going slightly off piste here. Listen, the world has gone slightly crazy. The world is very polarized, and it feels that there's a lot of hate and anxiety and pent-up frustration. And I don't know whether some of that was pandemic-led or it's just the world that we live in right now. How can we as humanity almost use this to try and understand, even with people with very different or even what we might consider abhorrent views, how do we have much more of an empathetic, or just help me understand why you think that? So is there something to really just people just starting to understand each other more? I don't know. That's just...
No, I think it's a great question, and one that deserves conversation. It feels like we have a lot more opportunity now to find people who think exactly like us, reinforce...
Well, the algorithm will feed that to us as well, right? Let's be honest.
It will feed it to us. It's going to feed it to us, and then we don't have joint channels anymore, right? It's not like everybody... I'll take a very old-fashioned example, listens to like the BBC or has, used to have 6 channels, and that was it. Everyone had the same...
I remember 3. I just aged myself there.
And you remember the water cooler conversation? Everyone would watch the same TV show, like Seinfeld, Friends, whatever it was. That's not the thing anymore. And that extends to how we take in information. So it's a lot more fragmented.
Yes.
And it's easy, therefore, when someone doesn't agree with us to say, well, I have a whole bunch of people that agree with me. That's my in-group. This is the out-group. Like, let's reject this. And I think empathetic is the key thing here. And I think empathy sometimes gets a bad rap. But what it ultimately is, again, going back to treating people as experts of their own experiences, no one comes out fully fledged into this world wanting to hurt other people or cause damage or cause division, right? There's some fundamental either conviction they have, something driving them. They want to belong to something. They want to feel secure. And it used to be, to put my sociologist hat on, you used to have areas where we'd go and we'd kind of be together, right? It used to be that, religion would do this. It used to be that social communities would do this. Less and less that's the case. Right. And oftentimes, in fact, personal view, sometimes it's our employers that are our communal space. And that's where we look for...
That's our experience, though, isn't it? That's our dominant experience.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like well-being at work, it used to be that if you needed someone to talk to, you'd go to like a pastor or, your whatever, rabbi or your molana.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily where you go. And so you go to like a therapist, that might you get through your benefits. And it's just where you get your support has shifted, I think. But what that ultimately means is that it doesn't necessarily help us find common ground. And empathy, or what we call empathy, I think is fundamentally saying no one comes out here to hurt anybody. Where is this coming from? What is driving them? Where can we connect on this? And it's not about agreeing, but it's about understanding that people, again, why I'm fascinated with this space of studying people, is that we are fundamentally complicated on our own. Put us in a group, and it's just wild what we do.
So Khairunnisa, there's something on my mind that I think we seem to do very well as a society now. I'm oversimplifying. At being able to divide and conquer. This group is here, this group is here, and we can find different ways. And maybe anthropology in some ways is like this, where we can look at the differences. And that seems to be a trend, which is why polarization is everywhere. And this is just my perspective. How do we shift a humanity basis, these are crazy questions I'm asking, I know, to try and get people to see the commonality and see human, not different? Because we could do with a lot of that right now.
And I think it goes to fundamental, I'll say, drivers in a way.
Yep.
So for the longest time in history, the worst possible punishment you could get was exile. Worst possible punishment, right? If you think about it, exile. Why is that? We want to belong to something.
From your community, your tribe.
Exactly. From your family, community, tribe. We want to belong to something. And we're always looking for, in fact, we're kind of patterned and programmed because we also got safety for the longest time in our tribe.
Well, we're going back thousands of years now, aren't we?
Yeah.
To basic human instinct survival.
Exactly. If you left your group to go out there, it's not like you were a brave explorer, digital nomad. You were literally putting your life and limb at risk.
You weren't going to make it.
You weren't going to make it. Very rare that you would. And so this need to belong is fundamental. And if I see individuals who are acting in ways that I can't make sense of, I'm like, there's something driving a need to belong. And we know alienation is very common because we don't necessarily have those spaces, a lot of us. If we're living fully online or very online lives, we don't have the community spaces to go to, then we're going to look for it somewhere. And we're very susceptible as humans. I think we like to think we're brilliant and we're great, but I think we're all driven by like the same fundamental base needs that we have.
Yeah.
And we're not necessarily always fully aware of how we behave, what we do, and we can go down very far a path before we realize, hold on a second, what am I even doing?
Yes.
Unless in fact someone points it out to us. So I think to your point about this crazy world where there's a lot of division and how do we get to that humanness, I think it's understanding we do want to belong in some way. Can I give a solution for cutting through it? Absolutely not. I'd probably be runing countries if I could.
I was going to say, if you can right now, that would be,
What's the answer?
vote for Khairunnisa. But we need more of that in the world, don't we?
I think so.
You've piqued my interest about something else now, because I've got teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old. They've grown up in a very, very different way. So what thoughts have you got for the senior leaders in organizations who are inevitably going to be of an older demographic? How do they see and embrace and understand and welcome this younger generation who sometimes feel like they've come from a different place altogether?
Yeah.
How can they use this anthropology element or this curiosity, empathy element to understand? Because a lot of leaders have said to me, I may have 5 generations working in one business. How do I understand that? I come from the 60s or the 70s. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's something we encounter a lot, in fact.
Yeah.
And I work at the Smarty Train, and it's because, as you said, a lot more commonality, more generations coming in.
Yes.
There's a lot in the papers right now, especially about, obviously, younger generation and the challenges that they're facing. And I think to go to your point about putting things into context, seeing people, as I would say, as experts in their own experiences, that's something that is a very teachable thing to do.
Right.
And it's in some ways more accessible than saying, be empathetic, live with compassion. It's saying, what context are they coming from? So obviously very online. When you enter a job market, when it's recession or difficulty, over your lifetime, you're going to earn less. You're going to have less opportunities than someone who entered in an upswing. That's just how it works. Mm-hmm. All the mental health challenges, going to university during lockdown, challenges faced, etc. The list is very long, Adam. When they're entering the work environment, again, it's not that anyone's coming in with any bad intent. It's actually a willingness. They've gone through the whole process of getting to this role.
Right.
What are they looking to achieve through it? And in some ways, the most meaningful thing is conversation and connection. So actual FaceTime. I don't mean doesn't have to be physical FaceTime, but relational time.
But real conversation.
Real conversation and a real attempt at understanding. I was reading recently, some research was done that, for generation coming to the workforce, they're a lot more inclusive in their mindset on average than previous generations. But the one area where they'll actually have a hard time connecting with someone is on ideological differences.
Right.
So they're not necessarily as what we might say inclusive. But if you think about it, ideological differences tend to be, on average, generational. So that's another hurdle that needs crossing.
Because they were born into whatever that ideology may have been, the dominant one at the time.
Exactly.
So you haven't known anything different.
Yeah. Also, generally, as you grow older, you tend to have more wealth and you tend to want to maintain that wealth because you're thinking about retirement. You're thinking about and if you're entering the workforce, younger generations,
your priorities change.
Exactly it.
Gotcha.
And that's completely normal and natural, and it tends to be the curve. But if you're an intergenerational workforce, it's about actually ensuring that as a leader, you're creating opportunities for mix across. The more you can get people to work in groups or at least connect with one another in different ways. And we talked about all the change and the craziness of the world. One of the things that we're seeing is that organizations are recognizing how much the silos within their organizations are hurting them.
Right.
And how much cross-collaboration needs to happen to address some of the very thorny challenges coming.
You've just described most big businesses, right?
Basically.
And what are you doing to try and help businesses who are talking about silos? And I come from the legal profession where people are best in class and they've done very well over many decades being the best in this particular field. But this is one of the challenges for leaders to become more enterprise. So how what are you doing to help leaders come out of a silo and see above the parapet and right across the gambit of the business and maybe all the regions within which they operate? How do you do that when you've been so successful in I'm the best at X?
Yeah.
But now I've got to get on the balcony and off the dance floor.
Yeah.
How do you help them?
It's a big transition point. And what we find is that when we work with leaders and groups of leaders, especially on programs, is that we always default to our comfort zones. when things are changing, when we're stressed or feeling insecure.
Yeah.
And for many leaders, they're very good at what they do technically. So their
Yes.
default zone is their technical expertise.
And AI is challenging that even more now, right?
100%. Technical expertise becomes a point of safety, and so you kind of go back into silo thinking of what you know. But again, very human response. And so what we do is often surfacing that.
It's like flight or fight, isn't it?
Basically, that's exactly what happens. And what we're finding in the leaders that we're working, and we work most effectively, by the way, this is most effective to do when you're working with groups of leaders at the global enterprise level, is to actually focus on that self-awareness. Like, how do you respond to this? Understand that this is how you're wired to work.
Yes.
Now what do we do? And opportunities for that cross-collaboration in learning or training or like off-site spaces is a great space to do it, because people are together. I don't want to say the risks are lower, but there's more opportunity to try things out and to experiment, build that muscle, see the value.
Connection piece.
Exactly, and move forward with it.
I spoke to John Amici a number of times, who is a psychologist and played for the NBA. And John lives in this country. And I remember he said something to me, and he said, interpersonal comfort trumps organizational change. And that always stuck on my mind. What are some of the things that you have noticed or you're now working with leaders on which have flowed from the pandemic? Because I said to an audience recently, whilst the pandemic has finished, there are still some residual impacts that we are dealing with from the pandemic, which aren't going to go away either. So what are you seeing as linked to the pandemic, but still very relevant here in 2025?
There might be a few things here.
Yeah.
I think one is that when the pandemic happened, there was almost a shift in that people, not employers, but people were almost in the driver's seat a little bit, right? In that they were able to, so many jobs opened up, and like recruitment in a whole bunch of industries skyrocketed. There was a lot of demand. And so if you were applying for, you had much more ability to say things, to, protest, to demand, to request. And it was a bit of a shift. You were able to work from home.
We saw the power shift.
We saw the power shift. You're working from home, and it's completely possible to do that. And, many organizations in this space of I think it was 10 weeks, shifted all their systems to be online, which if the pandemic hadn't happened would have maybe taken 10 years to do, right? In terms of the requirement to work virtually.
We all became a tech company.
All this change happened, power shift. We're kind of moving back now from an employer perspective, a leader perspective. It's okay, now I can call the shots again. I say this farcically, but we're in control. But actually, I think people remember that moment. And it's actually, hold on, maybe we should renegotiate how this works. And I think there's something there that needs to be listened to. I think one of the other pieces that came out of the pandemic was how we work, which was significantly changed.
Which is a huge debate still.
Huge debate. Also, a lot more care around, I think we at least saw with clients we work with, a shift towards mental health and well-being really became a focal point during the pandemic. And it was very difficult, obviously, for many people. And we're seeing that for leaders, the load that they have, managers all the way through to senior leaders, to manage some of that shakeout or fallout for their people is still there. So you become not only a line manager or a leader, but you're also still thinking about mental health, well-being. And that's a very effortful thing to do. Emotional labor, basically, right? That comes into play. And I think that's not something that's been resolved. We're seeing a lot more people being like, well, why should I be a manager? Why should I lead? Let me just be okay with what I do and then have a healthy life.
Well, it's not the technical anymore now, is it? It's actually this human-centered piece. I remember I had an audience in this very studio of much younger leaders in their kind of mid-20s to mid-30s. And one of the things they talked about, and I hadn't heard this before, Khairunnisa, was they said, we want personalised leadership. And I said, help me understand that. She said, I want to make sure that my leader really sees me, really hears me, and really knows me. Which takes me back to something else John Amici said, leadership is energy expensive.
Oh, 100%.
So what do we make of 2025 and beyond now from an anthropological or human connection? Kind of what conclusions are you coming to right now, which I'm sure will change because everything is changing, but are you landing on certain things that are happening right now or are the state of affairs right now?
I think what I'm moving towards is that what a leader needs to be and do is shifting. And I don't know that everyone is catching up to it just yet.
Right.
I think that, like you said, people want leaders who know them and know what they do. But leaders are operating in far more complex environments. From an anthropological perspective, to recognize that actually, I think historically in some ways, we've seen people as part of maybe our humanness gets in the way of achieving objectives and outcomes. right? So I have a strategy I need to execute as a leader. I need to have all these operating things in place. Oh, that person there is not doing it. This team's not performing. They're not on the journey with me.
Yeah.
And that frame is the strategy and the target is the focus point.
Yes.
I think what we as leaders need to realize is that nothing here matters in terms of target, focus point, strategy if you actually don't have your people performing in line to get there and understanding or buying into it. And
this is the human system, isn't it?
Basically.
So we have mission, vision, values, strategy, all these things and beautiful processes, documents and procedures. But if you haven't really thought about the human system...
Meaningless. No change, nothing happens. And when there is so much change happening, we're seeing leaders changing their strategies, businesses 3 years less. It used to be 5, 7 further.
Yeah.
That requires, especially for those large, global, complicated organizations we talked about, that human system shifting collectively in on a human level tight time frame is a massive challenge. And so what does a leader need to be now is, I think, reframe to recognize that it's so corny to say your people are the thing, but actually the human system, as you put it, is what you need to really be thinking about. And that goes to the point of what are people understanding about why we're doing this? What does it mean, if anything, to them? But more importantly, can they connect this strategy, vision on paper to what they're doing in their day-to-day? And what, if anything, it means to contribute to that?
I had Professor Senio Driscoll, who I've known for many years, say to me that meaning is the new money. I can't like that as a phrase.
That's brilliant.
And would you agree with that?
I think definitely meaning is the new money.
Yeah.
And communication is how you generate that wealth. Because what we're finding is that if you have, as you said, on this side, strategy, vision, it's great. If you can't translate that into something that's meaningful, that gets people in your human system to change what they're thinking, feeling, doing, to align with that, that's the power, that communication piece. And that's a very messy in some ways, but also very structured thing you can do. And there's ways of communicating. There's ways of understanding what message needs to land, how to frame it.
Okay. So let's make this personal now to, I hope, leaders who are listening or watching of all kinds of businesses. In fact, even later this afternoon, I'm doing another episode with the former CEO of AT&T. She was the first female woman of color to be the CEO, and she has got a great story in relation to her background and her being maybe an outsider coming into a very different dominated landscape. So I am really interested in this subject. So let's try really bring it down to the practical for leaders. A leader of people is creating a shared experience or a lived experience for them. What should leaders be mindful of from this anthropological perspective? They're not specialists in anthropology, but what can we do to help ourselves and the people that we lead right now?
From an anthropological perspective.
First, using this skill set and this mindset that you're describing.
Exactly. I think the first I'd say is that you're not leading from above. You're not the lab coat watching the experiment happen. You're not outside.
I love that analogy, right? Well, you can't touch it because you can't contaminate it.
Exactly.
In some ways, right?
You're in it. And by being in it, you're shaping it. So you need to be aware of the impact that you're having in shaping it.
So you are contaminating it.
You're always going to contaminate it.
So it's, okay.
Yeah. Sometimes we have organizations that we work with that are going through massive amounts of change, C-suite level mandate, we have to do this. The next, identified leader is given their mission, succeed in this, and, you could be in my seat in the next period. We can enter a room, see how they run a meeting and how their team is responding to them when they're talking about what they need to do in the context of this change.
Right.
And you can pretty much say this is going to work or this is not going to work, because you can see the impact that leader, in terms of how they're leading, is having on their team. So if you're a leader, it's be aware of that, but not just be aware of that. Actually, from a very anthropological perspective, don't go with a hypothesis of this is what I think my team does.
Yeah.
This is what I think is going to work.
There's the bias and the assumption coming
Exactly.
up. Right?
Go assumptionless almost, and with curiosity. So you're saying you're observing, you're participating, but you're also seeing what's happening. What are the dynamics? What are some of the things that I maybe haven't noticed? What's holding us back? It could be interpersonal, it could be systemic, it could be tactical, whatever it is. And I think building that discipline to go in not to direct, but to understand is very powerful, because once you have the information to understand, you're able to much more effectively inform and, in fact, direct. And then the final, or maybe the third thing is continuously update your understanding of what you think is happening. And identify those people who give you the information, so you're updating that understanding effectively. to the point of people are experts in their experiences.
Yep.
It's about listening. So that curiosity, that listening, and that really dropping the assumptions and trying to see, to go to the fishbowl analogy, the water that you're all swimming in as an organization. And I think that's what the humanness is, and that's how you can lead a human system critically and effectively.
Yes.
And not in a way of absolutes that we need to get here and we aren't, because these are the failure metrics that we have right now.
So I know this is obviously something that you are very much focused on with Smarty Train. Just help everyone understand kind of what Smarty Train does for organizations to help them and their leaders.
So we take a very human-centered approach, anchored in a lot of science.
That's why we're having this conversation,
That's why we're having this conversation, to fundamentally understand context. But basically, when we work, especially at the leadership level with C-suite board, they come to us with very, in some ways, pressing challenges.
Right.
We need to change what we're doing. We've tried all of these things to do it, but it's not working. And often it ends up being a people challenge. And not people as in individual performers, but the human system, as you said. So we go in and it's about identifying some of that, but actually working with leaders that how do you communicate this message? How do you translate a message into the behavioral change that needs to happen aligned to a larger transformational initiative, all in the context of the skills and the mindsets that are required to make this happen.
Okay.
So communication, making it stick, what needs to happen, but then also working with leaders at how do they communicate this. And one of the most important components is also storytelling, which is how do you tell the story of this change, but then also connect it in some ways to yourself, humanize it a little bit, so that people aren't seeing this as something that was imagined in the clouds, but it has value, it has meaning, and that they can hook onto a little bit.
We've had such an amazing conversation that piece we hadn't quite got to, my fault. But that piece of storytelling is important, isn't it? So how do leaders, kind of in a snapshot, how do leaders embrace ambiguity and use storytelling to help them and their people navigate through that?
One of the things to obviously know is that we are, and there's a ton of books written on, we're wired for storytelling, right? We communicate information most effectively through story.
Yep.
We make stories out of our experiences. It's what we do. So it's a very
We tell ourselves stories.
We tell ourselves story about ourselves. It's a very natural thing for us to do. And when you're communicating something in the context of a story, the reason it's so powerful is that our brains light up in all kinds of ways, multisensory ways, that makes content resonate more and stick with us more, because it's not just that I'm understanding this from an analytical, rational perspective. I'm actually feeling it. And that's where you start.
That's the visceral piece,
That's
isn't
the
it?
visceral piece. And that's where you want to connect with people. And I'll say one more thing in terms of this change at an organization level. It's at the leadership level, but it's all the way down. So oftentimes we'll come in and with a client, an organization, change is happening. But for some, it's actually, we're aware that we need to be different from what we are 5 years from now.
Right.
Where do we start now? So it's going to early careers, graduates, new entrants coming into your organization.
You've done a lot of work, haven't you, in this space?
A lot of work of that space, because they're kind of, and all the stuff on AI notwithstanding, because it's still a critical part of your workforce.
Yes.
Great to have artificial technology, driving efficiencies, simplifying automated tasks, but you will need people running something in a few years' time. So how do you get that change started through the DNA of your organization?
Right.
Is a very important one to think about. Anywhere where there is people who need to think differently, do differently, learn differently, that's kind of where we come in and we can zone in to say, this is the place to focus, let's drive impact.
One of the things I said, again, to an audience a few weeks ago was that the future of leadership is deeply human, AI will do the rest. Is there kind of a headline point for you in relation to where are we going as a human race and leaders and AI? I'm asking you the most ridiculously, because if you solve these questions, Karen, seriously, we're voting for you. It's so what is your thinking at the moment in relation to where are we headed with everything that's going on and AI?
So prior to being in the world of learning, I was in the world of innovation.
Right.
When I was in the world of innovation, this was the time of like the Internet of Things, connectivity.
Yep.
Everything's going to be a smart machine.
Which wasn't very long ago.
No, it wasn't very long ago. And in 5 years' time, we're going to have like Rosie from the Jetsons doing everything for us. But what actually happened is that your freezer is smart, your vacuum is smart, your air fryer is smart, but you have 17 apps on your phone to control each of them.
Yeah.
So there's this moment when a technology or a change comes in that looks revolutionary, that we all imagine the absolute best outcome of it. But what we also need to do is plan for not that outcome to happen.
Right.
And I think in the world of AI where we are now, there's so much potential. There's such amazing things that could happen.
Yeah.
We need to be obviously very mindful of it going super well. We need to be mindful of it not going very well as business leaders.
Let's be honest, the jury is out, isn't it? Still in relation
out.
to are we going to utopia or dystopia?
Exactly. And as leaders, I think sometimes it's an odd thing, but I think sometimes leaders are like, where do I need to go? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's important to ask, what are the implications and what's the human impact of this? Because what is the point of it otherwise? And I think that's a big question with AI. How are you, and we're working with organizations and leaders who are actually wrestling with that exact question. So it's not just, I want to automate everything, but actually, what is the space for this? And then what are those skills, human skills, that are going to matter so much to enable this, but also to make sure that we're steady during this period of transition?
Yes.
So I think in terms of my headline for the AI piece, it's jury's out.
Yeah.
Hedge your bets, but critically think very hard about, if you think of a world 5 to 7 years from now, what are the skills that you're going to want in your system that might not be easily automated, that might be supporting, that might be changing the game?
And those are the human elements, aren't they? I mean, that's certainly my perspective, is that the curiosity, the empathy, the humility, the vulnerability, those are the things that are becoming more and more important now. Whereas as a knowledge worker, as a trial lawyer by background, table stakes. And I can't compete with AI, let's be honest.
Yeah.
That knows the entire legal history of every country over every decade. But it's true, isn't it?
Definitely.
So it's understanding what are table stakes, where to try not to compete, and where to try to partner.
I also think one thing is to recognize that AI, it's still human, because we made it, we feed it. And being a bit critical that it's not separate from us. It's not a technology that exists outside of us, but actually, what does that mean for how we work with it, what it can and cannot do? Because we can get
It's a really good point, isn't it?
Yeah.
We haven't inherited this from a planet far, far beyond.
A beneficent overlord.
We've done this.
Yeah.
How can people connect with you to carry on the conversation or get you involved in their conversations?
LinkedIn, email.
Yep.
All that good stuff.
I'll put that in the show notes,
yes,
so people
please.
can access that. And my final question to you is this: with all of the wonderful experiences, wisdom that you have, and clients that you're working with, is there a standout piece of leadership advice that you've given or received?
Pay attention to the impact that you have in a space, and think about what impact you want to have. And I don't mean like big legacy impact. I mean how you make people feel when they're working with you or for you, and how you want them to feel.
Right.
And bridging that delta, I think, is what unlocks the best of leadership.
Because let's be honest, it's going to be how you make people feel that will be your legacy in this world as a leader.
Exactly.
So I think that's a wonderful place to finish. Khairunnisa, thank you so much for coming into the studio. That time has flown past. Have you enjoyed that conversation?
I love this. Thank you for having me.
I think there are more conversations we need to have, because we've scratched the surface there. But as I say, I'll put all the URLs and connection points in the show notes, so people can, as I say, get you involved in their conversations, and we can maybe we'll have to have another episode as well. Thanks so much, Adi, for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Join us again next week for more curiosity and insight with the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.leadersenigma.com. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms and on our dedicated YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining the community.